Can everybody hear me okay?
Probably don't miss a lot.
All right, my name's Mike Gaddy. Spent 30 years in the United States Army. Decided I didn't like it and quit. During that time, I served as a combat infantryman for almost 21 years. Then I spent 9 years in the oxymoronic field called military intelligence, with tours of duty at the National Security Agency, which is usually called NSA or no such agency. And then I spent a 3-year tour at the Pentagon. So for Wendy coerced me into telling you all that, it really is immaterial, it has nothing to do with what we're going to talk about, but I've spent the better part of 3 decades studying the Constitution, our founders, why they did what they did, and I found out that I learned an awful lot of stuff that I was never taught in school. And all of this stuff is available, people, if you will just do your research and find it out. And it's imperative upon a free people to know why they're free.
Amen.
And what guarantees they have to protect the rights that aren't granted by anyone except by your Creator.
Amen.
So those rights cannot be taken by government regardless of how many laws they pass or how many ordinances they come up with. It's just not there. But to be able to argue the point, to defend ourselves, it is imperative that we know how we got this. So many times my presentations are, people would look at it and say, well, you're anti-government. No, I'm anti-unconstitutional government. And there's a big difference. But many times my presentations are, people expect me to start being railing against politicians of this ilk or that, and I don't do that. Because the reason today that we have unconstitutional representatives in Congress and in the White House and other places is because of us.
We elected him.
Thomas Jefferson said, you get the government you deserve. And we have that in spades. So when people make asinine remarks, like the dean of the law school at the University of Denver made an asinine statement that the supremacy clause of the Constitution says that the federal government can do anything they want to. Columbia University Law School professor said that it is the duty of the Supreme Court to mold the Constitution to fit their personalities. Yesterday we had a hearing that we attended here in Durango. We were opposing the government control of water rights in Montezuma County. Because those of us in the West know that when they control the water, they control the people. That has to stop. I was very proud that one of our county commissioners came with us and sat at the same table with us and made his plea to the judge as well. But when I gave my reasons for the fact that my group opposes the water grab, it's the county commissioner, Keenan Ertel, leaned over to me and he said, have you ever noticed every time you mention the Constitution in front of a judge or a lawyer, they don't want to talk about it? Why is that? Well, contrary to popular belief, at least the last 3 lawyers that I have talked to said that during the course of their education, they were never taught anything about the Constitution. They were taught what clowns in black gowns said the Constitution meant. So we live in a society today where the majority of people will tell you that the Supreme Court can rule on what the constitutionality of any decision is. Can anybody tell me where that's written in the Constitution? Who said they should rule? Who said they can decide?
Self-imposed.
There's a lady who sits on the Supreme Court of the United States who, as an appellate court judge, wrote in a dissenting opinion that she felt that sex between children and adults should not be a crime. And we want her making decisions for our people, right? Most of the Supreme Court decisions are 5-4 decisions. This country was not designed to be a monarchy. One person cannot decide what the law is. Now we'll focus basically on us, we the people. We get the government we deserve, at least Thomas Jefferson said so, and I think he's correct. So what do we do to change that?
Education.
We frequently hear educated idiots in our society, most of them who teach in college, either in the media, government, or academia, pontificate ad nauseum that our founders never envisioned the firepower of today's modern weapons. For once, they got something right. Our founders couldn't have anticipated the firepower of the weapons that we have in today's world. But you know, they did get something right, and that was they did fully understand what happens when we get tyranny in government.
That's right.
Why do we have a constitution? A government exists, according to Thomas Jefferson, a government exists to protect the rights of the people. It doesn't exist to tell you how much water you can have in your toilet. It doesn't exist to try to steal your water rights. And it sure doesn't exist to try to remove your only means of protection from that very tyrannical government envisioned by our founders. Let's stop and think for a minute. In all of your classes, how many people have actually had a class on the Constitution before? Why did we want to change from the Articles of Confederation? Wasn't working, our country was in debt, the states were not paying their bills. So we had a group of people get together met in Philadelphia in May of 1787. Second Monday in May was their first day, and they stayed there until the end of September. Just as a little illustration, not to give anybody a hard time. Who was the quarterback of the Denver Broncos this year? Is there anybody here who doesn't know? Who was the member who sat through 4 months of our Constitution to help prepare it, helped work on it, and did everything else, and then after it had been completed and signed, he refused to sign it and said, "I would rather cut my arm off than sign this document"? Who was that?
You can't answer.
I'll skip over that, Wendy, because you were wrong. Can you imagine someone who would sit there for all that period of time? Now, why do we know more about a professional football team than we do about our Constitution?
Because it titillates our toes.
Pardon me?
It titillates our toes.
I'm not even going to try to repeat that, man. 'Cause I'll say something bad, I can promise you.
Would it be the intentional dumbing down of our government to keep people under control?
Well, slaves are much easier manipulated when they are ignorant. I use this illustration in my classes quite a bit. If you somehow, I don't know how anyone would have it, but if you somehow had an extra $20 and you slipped it in a coat pocket and forgot it was there, and you no longer knew it was there, How would you know if I stole it? That's the story of our rights in America. We've got them, but we don't know what they are. And when some idiot from a law school at the University of Denver makes a preposterous statement, we don't have the intellectual knowledge to challenge them. And the media is not going to. If you're waiting on them, it ain't going to happen. If you want to understand why our media is in such a mess today, all you have to do is go to Google and Google in Operation Mockingbird. In the 1950s, the CIA bought and controlled the U.S. media. They still do today. As a matter of fact, the director of the CIA told a congressional investigating committee when he was asked how hard is it to control the media, he said, not really hard at all. Actually, we pay more for a good hooker than we do for a journalist. That is a correct statement. Lately, if you read all the news and listen to everything that's happening, and I will not use the term liberal, because it's bastardized. Thomas Jefferson was a liberal. They've stolen a phrase that doesn't belong to them. They are socialists. Progressive is another word for socialist. So, when those people, if you listen to them today, we would all think when it comes to the gun control issue that they want a nice, peaceful society. Is that not what we would think? And they think by taking the means to protect ourselves from us, that we will somehow become a peaceful society. There will be no shootings, no one will be shot, no one will be beat to death with a bat, which is the #1 instrument of murder in New York City. But I haven't seen anyone propose a ban on bats. I was reading a police magazine to see how the chiefs of police in this country are leaning towards gun control and what their thoughts are. And I read a quote in a magazine by a police officer, and I'm trying to determine where this quote actually came from, but I want you to listen to this. This came from one of our socialists in our government today, or in our media today, and they said, when they were talking about gun control, they said, conservative extermination is our only solution. Sooner or later, it will have to be done. The time for talk is over. Now, they're not going to have any guns, so I imagine they're going to have to do it with the jawbone of an ass, which means they'll have to kill each other to get one. Excuse me for a second, I need to scroll down and I wasn't in the right place. The socialist conclusions might be more forgivable if it wasn't reflective of a very clear bias. One wonders why these socialists are all upset about those of us who don't commit crimes having a so-called assault weapon, but there was little more than a murmur when a Border Patrol agent was shot with an assault weapon that was sold to them and facilitated by the U.S. government. Where were the protests? Where were the people screaming from the rooftops? Thousands of these so-called assault weapons were facilitated into the hands of known criminals by our federal government. So when your government is willing to sell an assault weapon to a criminal but doesn't want you to have one, is there a lesson in there somewhere?
Would it be they're trying to perpetuate their own existence?
I'm sorry, sir?
Would it be they're trying to perpetuate their own existence?
Well, I stop and think so many times about the oath of office. That all elected and appointed officials, deputies, police, everyone, they take an oath to uphold and defend the Constitution of the United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. When you take that oath, that is not an oath against foreign enemies, unless they are enemies of your Constitution. The same is true of the domestic enemy. The domestic enemy to the Constitution is the person who takes an oath to uphold and defend it and then promptly starts destroying it. That is the domestic enemy to our Constitution. We've got 535 people that basically control this country. A country of what, 300 and how many million now? Does anybody remember? 535 people control this country. Those 535 people will tell us they hate deficits. We didn't cause them, they did. They tell us that they hate crime. They tell us all the things they hate, and they tell us each election season how they're going to fix it. Been done yet? We can fix crime by selling known drug gang cartel members AK-47s and AR-15s. Someone please explain to me how that works? And if you have that list is passed around. I've got 42 pages of notes for today. I hope I get through half of them. If you would like the complete list of all of my notes, and which gives the origins of the things that I say, if you would like those, get on the email list and I'll be happy to send them to anyone who wants them so you can research this as well as I do. And please, if you find any place where I've made a mistake, please let me know. I do not, if I make a mistake in a quote or what have you, I do not do it intentionally. So what did our founders think about being armed and having the means to defend yourself? You know what? They really didn't talk about it a great deal. Because when something is so basic and so simple and so accepted in your mind that you have the means to defend yourself, they didn't really discuss it a lot. But the one thing we had when we started our Constitutional Convention, we had delegates to that Constitutional Convention who wanted a monarchy, who didn't want the people to have any representation whatsoever. They wanted to set up a tribunal and have a president appointed for life. They wanted all members of Congress appointed for life. They wanted everyone, they didn't want the people, they thought these people that I refer to as the nationalists at our Constitutional Convention thought the people were too dumb to be involved in their own government. Anyone know who the leader of that group was? Alexander Hamilton. And you know what the funny thing about Hamilton was is he was voted down 7 times with that proposal in 4 months. He finally got so upset that he left and went back to New York. But then he came back for the signing. Then we had, that was a monarchist. Then we had a nationalist who didn't think the people were smart enough to govern themselves. And he introduced his plan, but he felt like because of his diminutive size that he would not present it, so he got Edmund Randolph, the governor of Virginia, to present it because Edmund Randolph was 6'4" and very articulate in his speech. Now, who might that have been? James Madison. James Madison was the Bill Clinton of his day. He could change his mind on one subject 3 times in the same paragraph. And he is called the father of our Constitution. His proposals were voted down continuously. These were entertained to our founders. These forms of government were entertained to our founders. They rejected it totally. The most votes James Madison ever got for his nationalist plan, which he called the Virginia Plan, the most votes he ever got in 4 months was 3. So the people who founded our country did not want a monarchy, and they did not want a nationalist form of government. What's the difference in a national government and a confederated or a republic? A confederated republic. What's the difference? The national government is one, and there were so many arguments over the first 3 words to our Constitution at the Constitutional Convention and the ratification conventions. There were so many arguments over the words, "we the people." Patrick Henry said, "Why do you do that? Why did you call it we the people? Why did you not say we the states?" We were never intended to have a national government. That was voted down, as I said, continuously in our Constitutional Convention. And yet today, you will hear almost everybody call us a nation. Our founders never intended for us to be a nation. They intended for us to be a republic. I think we got a little pledge that we repeat quite frequently that says, "one nation, indivisible." The "under God" was added later. That pledge was written by a socialist. Yet we keep repeating it over and over and over again. He was a socialist minister who was kicked out of his religion because he professed from the pulpit that Jesus was a socialist. We keep repeating the mantra that he wrote for us. Our founders never intended for us to be indivisible. As a matter of fact, that was the very basis of the 10th Amendment. If you have a government that you have created to protect your rights and it begins to become tyrannical, what are your options? Nullification. And you simply say, "No, I will not do this." Are all laws passed by our legislators constitutional? Thomas Jefferson, who is one of my very favorites because he never wavered throughout his entire life. He always stood for the liberty of the individual. Everything was about the liberty of the individual. So Jefferson was at the Constitutional Convention, right? No, he was ambassador to France. There are a few letters that would indicate that Alexander Hamilton went to his friend George Washington prior to the Constitutional Convention and said, "You know, old Thomas speaks real good French. Let's get him to France." Because if you want to talk about 2 of our founders who hated each other with a passion, it was Thomas Jefferson and Alexander Hamilton. They had a huge argument over the National Bank, which today we call the Federal Reserve. Hamilton was so upset at the end of the Constitutional Convention, he referred to the Constitution as a worthless fabric. And then he set about to use his position in government to destroy it and to convert it into whatever he wanted it to be. George Will, political commentator, once said, We often quote Jefferson, but we live in Hamilton's world. Unfortunately, he's correct. Now, some of us in here are over the legal age. I see 3 or 4. How many times in your lifetime have you heard a president of our country quote Thomas Jefferson? They will mention his name. They do not quote him because he was the total antithesis of the government we live under today. Does anyone know who the last president was to quote Thomas Jefferson? Actually, it was John Kennedy. Reagan quoted Thomas Jefferson, but the quote he used was incorrect. He said that the people who expect to be ignorant and free want what never was and never will be. The Monticello Foundation says that Thomas Jefferson never said that. And in 1984, Ronald Reagan said that he did. And it's real easy to get caught up in false quotes, people. They're everywhere. But if you want to know anything, question any quote by Thomas Jefferson, go to the Monticello Foundation. They research everything that is supposed to have been said. They have all of his works, they have all of his speeches, they have all of his letters, and they have researched every quote that is attributed to Thomas Jefferson. Now, do we know if Thomas Jefferson said that to someone in speech? We don't. He may have. Sounds like him. But there is no accurate record that he ever wrote that. Jefferson wrote over 3,000 letters. Can anyone remember any record of Jefferson ever giving a speech? Jefferson had a speech impediment. He preferred not to speak. He gave most of his in writings. He wrote extensively to his children. So I'm going to give you a few quotes. I wanted to ask you the question. Or I already asked the question, I answered it myself. My wife says I do that quite often. What did JFK say about Thomas Jefferson? In 1962, one of the greatest, he actually didn't quote Jefferson, but he mentioned it. JFK had the Nobel laureates meet in the White House for a dinner. All of the Nobel Peace Prize winners. And he said, as they were all assembled, he stood up to the podium and he said, well, today in the White House, we have the greatest collection of knowledge assembled here since Jefferson ate here alone. Now, what was one of our founding fathers' greatest fears? And this was just about all of them. What was their greatest fear? A standing army. Did you know our Constitution requires that there be a renewal of the right to have an armed military other than a Navy? Our Constitution requires that be voted on every 2 years as to whether we keep the Army, the Navy, the Marines. The Army, I'm sorry, not the Navy. The Army, the Air Force, and the Marines. Our founders wanted a Navy only. Why?
Protect our shores.
Protection.